Dating over 60. 5 positions men beg for, but women never try. Relationship psychologists who study long-term partnerships, including those influenced by Jungian psychology, have identified 5 relational positions, ways of being and relating in partnership, that men consistently say they crave but rarely experience with women. These aren't physical positions or bedroom techniques. They're psychological and emotional stances that create the kind of deep connection, respect, and attraction that sustains relationships far beyond initial chemistry. Carl Jung's work on masculine and feminine psychology, on the integration of opposites, and on what creates psychological wholeness in relationship provides a framework for understanding why these positions matter so profoundly. Men at 60 and beyond, who've lived through enough relationships to know what's missing, consistently identify these 5 relational stances as what they most desire but rarely receive. Not because women are unwilling, but because we've been conditioned away from them by cultural messaging about how we should be in relationships. The irony is that these positions aren't about sacrificing yourself or becoming less than you are. They're about showing up more fully, more authentically, with the kind of psychological strength and presence that actually creates lasting attraction and respect. Women who embody these stances report feeling more empowered, not less, and their partners report feeling more deeply satisfied in ways that have nothing to do with surface-level romance or physical chemistry alone. Carl Jung wrote, "The meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The 5 positions we're discussing today create the conditions for that transformative reaction where both people are changed and deepened by the relationship rather than diminished by it. If you've been in relationships that felt flat or superficial despite genuine affection, if you've wondered what creates the kind of depth men say they're looking for, if you're ready to understand relationship dynamics at a psychological level that most people never access, you're in the right place. This channel is dedicated to understanding the deeper patterns that create fulfilling partnership. Consider subscribing if you want insights that go beyond surface advice into the psychology of what actually makes relationships work. We're building a community of women who understand that great relationships require both emotional intelligence and psychological awareness.
Position number 1. The woman who holds her own center. The first relational position men consistently say they crave but rarely experience is what Jungian psychology calls holding your own center, being fully present in relationship while maintaining your separate psychological identity, your own values, your own ground. This is the opposite of merging or losing yourself, and it's also the opposite of defensive independence that keeps intimacy at bay. It's the capacity to be deeply connected while remaining fundamentally yourself. Men describe this as incredibly attractive because it eliminates the pressure they often feel to provide all meaning, purpose, and emotional stability for their partners. When a woman holds her own center, she brings her full self to relationship rather than looking to the relationship to define who she is. Robert, 71, explained this in an interview about his most satisfying relationship. "Eleanor has this quality where she's completely present with me, engaged, caring, interested, but she's also fundamentally herself. She doesn't need me to validate her worth or provide her identity. She knows who she is independently, and she's inviting me to know that person rather than trying to become whoever she thinks I want. That groundedness is magnetic." Jungian analyst Marion Woodman wrote extensively about this. A woman who is connected to her own center can be in relationship without losing herself. She can be vulnerable without being dependent, open without being merged. That psychological strength is what allows real intimacy rather than the pseudo-intimacy of dependency. Margaret learned to embody this position after years of relationships where she'd lost herself in trying to be what partners wanted. With Thomas, she made a conscious commitment to remain fully herself, maintaining her friendships, pursuing her interests, honoring her values even when they differed from his. The effect was profound. Thomas told her repeatedly that her groundedness was one of the things he found most attractive about her. I'd been with women who seemed to mold themselves to what I thought I wanted. With Margaret, I always know where she actually stands, what she actually thinks, who she actually is. That authenticity creates trust and respect that performing for me never could. This position requires ongoing psychological work, knowing yourself well enough to maintain your center in relationship, even when relationship pressures tempt you to abandon it. It means having clear values and boundaries, knowing what matters to you independently of what matters to your partner, being willing to disappoint him occasionally rather than betraying yourself to keep peace. Linda practiced this with James during a disagreement about how to spend holidays. Her instinct was to defer to what he wanted to keep things smooth. Instead, she held her ground. I understand your preference, but spending Christmas with my family matters deeply to me. I need us to find a solution that honors both our needs, not just yours. James later told her that moment deepened his respect for her significantly. She wasn't being difficult or rigid. She was honoring something that mattered to her and expecting me to do the work of actual partnership, finding solutions that work for both of us. That psychological strength is attractive in ways accommodation never is. The practical application: know yourself well enough to maintain your center in relationship. Keep your friendships, interests, values, and boundaries intact. Be willing to disappoint your partner occasionally, rather than losing yourself to keep peace. That groundedness creates attraction and respect that dependency or merging never can.
Position number 2. The woman who can receive without keeping score. The second position men say they crave but rarely experience is what psychologists call gracious receiving, the ability to accept care, gifts, service, and affection without immediately reciprocating or keeping mental tallies of who's done what. This doesn't mean being a taker or expecting everything without giving. It means being able to simply receive what is offered with genuine appreciation rather than anxiously rushing to even the score. Carl Jung's work on masculine psychology identified the masculine impulse to provide, to give, to contribute as central to male identity and satisfaction. But men report feeling frustrated when their offerings are met with immediate reciprocation rather than genuine receiving, because it makes them feel like their contribution wasn't truly valued or needed. It was just recorded as a transaction to be balanced. Kenneth described this with Ruth. When I do something for Ruth, take her somewhere special, fix something in her house, bring her something she mentioned wanting, she receives it with genuine appreciation rather than immediately trying to reciprocate or minimize what I did. She'll say, "Thank you, this really means a lot to me," and let herself enjoy it. That receiving makes me want to do more, to contribute more, because I can see my contribution lands and matters. Relationship therapist David Data writes about this dynamic. When a woman can truly receive, not as transaction but as gift, it allows a man to feel his contribution actually matters. The constant keeping score or immediate reciprocation sends the message that his offering wasn't enough to just be appreciated. It created debt that must be immediately repaid. Patricia struggled with this because she'd been raised to never be beholden to anyone. When Martin did something thoughtful for her, her immediate response was to figure out how to reciprocate so she didn't owe him. A therapist helped her understand this was actually preventing intimacy. I learned to just receive, Patricia explained. When Martin does something kind or thoughtful, I let myself feel the gift of it. I express genuine appreciation. I don't rush to even the score. And surprisingly, it's made me feel more empowered, not less, because I'm allowing genuine generosity into my life instead of treating everything as transactional. Martin confirmed this shifted their dynamic. When Patricia just receives what I offer with real appreciation, I feel valued in a way I hadn't in previous relationships. The receiving is its own gift back to me. It tells me my contribution matters, that I've added something to her life. This position requires psychological security, believing you're worthy of receiving without having to immediately prove your worth through reciprocation. It requires trusting that generosity isn't a trap or a way to create debt. It means letting yourself be cared for, provided for, given to, without anxiously maintaining perfect balance. Helen practiced this by pausing before rushing to reciprocate when David did something thoughtful. She'd let herself fully feel and express appreciation for what he had given: time, attention, a gift, an act of service, before thinking about what she needed to do to balance things. It actually deepened our connection, Helen said. By receiving fully rather than immediately reciprocating, I was honoring his gift as meaningful rather than treating it as a transaction to be quickly balanced. And I discovered that genuine giving flows naturally from that place of having received well, rather than from anxious scorekeeping. The practical application: practice receiving what your partner offers with genuine appreciation rather than immediate reciprocation. Let yourself feel the gift of his attention, care, service, or generosity without rushing to even the score. Express heartfelt thanks and let the contribution land as meaningful. That gracious receiving allows men to feel their contributions matter in ways transactional balance keeping never does. Have you struggled with receiving without keeping score? Share your thoughts in the comments.
Position number 3, the woman who challenges him toward growth. The third position men say they desire but rarely experience is what Jungian psychology calls the worthy opponent, a woman who challenges him intellectually and psychologically, who doesn't accept his stagnation or settled comfort, who expects him to continue growing and calls him toward his better self. Not through nagging or criticism, but through maintaining her own standards and expecting him to rise to meet them. Jung wrote extensively about how psychological growth requires challenge and friction. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. A partner who challenges you toward growth is offering a profound gift, even when that challenge is uncomfortable. Men at 60 and beyond who've achieved success in their careers often report feeling stagnant in their personal development. They describe craving a partner who won't let them coast, who expects continued growth and evolution, who challenges their thinking and assumptions in ways that keep them engaged and developing. Thomas explained this about Margaret. Margaret doesn't accept my settled opinions or comfortable patterns without question. If I'm being lazy in my thinking or justifying behavior that doesn't align with my stated values, she'll call it out, not harshly, but clearly. She expects me to continue growing, and that expectation has made me more engaged with my own development than I'd been in years. This isn't about being critical or making your partner a project to fix. It's about maintaining your own standards and not lowering them to accommodate his stagnation. It's about engaging his ideas and assumptions with genuine challenge rather than automatic agreement. It's about expecting him to continue developing as a person rather than accepting that he's reached his final form. Ruth did this with Kenneth during a conversation where he was repeating old justifications for behavior that wasn't serving him well. Instead of letting it pass or agreeing to keep peace, she said directly, "I don't think you actually believe that. I think you're justifying something you know isn't aligned with who you want to be. What's the honest version?" Kenneth was initially defensive, then thoughtful. He later told her that challenge was exactly what he'd needed. Ruth doesn't let me get away with lazy thinking or comfortable stagnation. She expects me to be honest with myself and to keep growing. That expectation is a gift, even when it's uncomfortable, because it makes me better. Jungian analyst James Hollis writes about this dynamic. A partner who truly loves you will challenge you toward becoming more fully yourself, even when that challenge is uncomfortable. The person who accepts all your limitations without question isn't loving you. They're enabling your stagnation. Linda practiced this with James by refusing to accept explanations or patterns that clearly weren't serving him well. When he'd complain about situations but then justify his inaction, she'd push back gently. "You're more capable than this behavior suggests. What's really stopping you?" That expectation that he could do better, that he wasn't finished growing, kept him engaged with his own development in ways comfortable acceptance never had. The practical application: don't accept your partner's stagnation or comfortable patterns without question. Challenge his thinking when it seems lazy or self-justifying. Expect continued growth and development rather than accepting that he's reached his final form. Maintain your standards and don't lower them to accommodate his settling. That challenge, delivered with respect and genuine expectation of his capability, is a profound gift that keeps both of you growing.
Position number 4 men consistently say they crave is being with a woman who takes responsibility for her own emotional state, rather than making him responsible for managing, fixing, or preventing her negative emotions. This doesn't mean hiding feelings or being emotionally self-sufficient to the point of disconnection. It means doing your own emotional work and bringing him into your feelings as witness or support, rather than as cause or solution. Jung's work on psychological projection is relevant here. We often unconsciously make our partners responsible for emotional states that are actually about our own internal work. When women make men responsible for their happiness, security, or emotional stability, it creates pressure that eventually becomes suffocating and kills attraction. Robert described this difference with Eleanor. "In my previous marriage, I felt responsible for my wife's emotional state. If she was unhappy, it was my job to fix it. If she was anxious, I had to make her feel secure. It was exhausting." With Eleanor, she takes responsibility for her own emotions. She'll share what she's feeling, but she's not expecting me to fix it or making me responsible for it. That's liberating in ways I didn't know relationship could be. Relationship therapist Terry Real writes about this. "When you make your partner responsible for your emotional state, you're essentially making them your parent rather than your partner. You're saying, 'You need to regulate me,' rather than 'I regulate myself and invite you to be present with my experience.'" Margaret learned this distinction in therapy after recognizing a pattern where she'd feel anxious or insecure and then unconsciously blame Thomas or expect him to fix it. She started doing her own emotional work, identifying when her anxiety was about her own patterns rather than his behavior, managing her emotional state through her own tools rather than expecting him to constantly reassure her. "The shift was profound," Margaret explained. "I still share my feelings with Thomas, but I'm not making him responsible for them. I'll say, 'I'm feeling anxious about this situation,' rather than 'you're making me anxious.' I'll ask for support. 'Can you just listen while I process this?' rather than expecting him to fix my emotional state. That distinction has made our relationship feel like partnership rather than parenting." Thomas confirmed this changed their dynamic entirely. "When Margaret took responsibility for her own emotional work, I could be present with her feelings without feeling responsible for causing or fixing them. That let me be supportive rather than defensive, close rather than overwhelmed. This position requires genuine psychological work, learning to identify your emotions accurately, understanding their sources, developing your own tools for emotional regulation, distinguishing between feelings that are about relationship dynamics versus feelings that are about your own patterns. It means being vulnerable about your emotional experience while taking ownership of managing that experience rather than outsourcing it to your partner. Patricia practiced this by pausing when she felt strong negative emotions and asking herself, is this about something Martin actually did? Or is this my pattern being triggered? That pause allowed her to take ownership of her patterns and bring Martin into her emotional experience appropriately, rather than making him responsible for managing emotions that were ultimately hers to work with. The practical application: take responsibility for your own emotional state rather than unconsciously making your partner responsible for your happiness, security, or emotional stability. Do your own emotional work. Therapy, journaling, meditation, whatever tools help you understand and manage your inner experience. Share your feelings with your partner as witness and support, not as cause or solution. That emotional self-responsibility creates the conditions for genuine intimacy rather than the parent-child dynamic that kills attraction.
Position number 5. The woman who brings erotic energy and playfulness in relationship. The fifth position men say they crave, but rarely experience, particularly after 60, is being with a woman who maintains erotic energy and playfulness in relationship. Not just availability for sex, but genuine, feminine erotic presence that includes flirtation, playfulness, sensuality, aliveness that's not about reproduction or even necessarily about genital sexuality. Jung wrote about the anima and animus, the feminine and masculine energies within each person, and how relationships thrive when these energies can play and interact dynamically rather than becoming fixed and stagnant. Men report that as relationships age, women often abandon the erotic and playful dimension entirely, treating relationships as purely companionate or functional. They crave the return of erotic energy, not performance or strategic behavior, but genuine feminine aliveness, playfulness, the sense that the woman in their life hasn't completely closed down the erotic dimension of her being. Kenneth described this with Ruth. Ruth maintains this playful, flirtatious energy even after 3 years together. Not all the time, we're not teenagers, but regularly. She'll give me a look that's full of play and invitation. She'll touch me in passing in ways that communicate aliveness and desire. She hasn't decided that part of life is over or that our relationship should be purely companionate. That erotic energy keeps things alive between us in ways I didn't think were possible at this age. Jungian analyst Marion Woodman wrote extensively about feminine erotic energy. Eros isn't just about sexuality in the genital sense. It's about aliveness, connection, the capacity to bring vitality and play to relationship. When women shut down their erotic nature completely, relationships become dead, even when they're still technically intact. Linda learned to reclaim this dimension after years in a marriage where she'd completely shut down her erotic energy. With James, she consciously chose to maintain playfulness and sensuality, flirting with him, dressing in ways that made her feel attractive and alive, initiating physical contact that communicated desire and play rather than just obligation or routine. I'd thought that part of me was supposed to shut down as I aged, but reclaiming my erotic energy, not as performance for him, but as genuine aliveness in myself, transformed how I experienced relationship and how James experienced me. He tells me regularly that my aliveness and playfulness are among the things he finds most attractive about me. James confirmed this. Linda hasn't decided that erotic energy is inappropriate at our age. She maintains this playful, alive quality that communicates she still experiences herself as a sexual, sensual being. That's incredibly attractive, not because of specific acts, but because of the energy and aliveness it represents. This position requires overcoming internalized ageism, the belief that erotic energy and playfulness are inappropriate or impossible after a certain age. It means reclaiming your own sense of yourself as erotic and sensual being, quite apart from whether that results in specific sexual activity. It's about maintaining aliveness, play, flirtation, the capacity to bring erotic energy to interaction rather than shutting that dimension down completely. Helen practiced this by paying attention to her own sense of aliveness and sensuality, wearing things that made her feel attractive, taking care of her body in ways that felt good, initiating playful contact with David, flirting with him, maintaining the sense that the erotic dimension of their connection was alive rather than closed. The effect was that their entire relationship felt more vital, more alive, even in moments that weren't explicitly sexual. The practical application? Don't shut down your erotic energy or decide that playfulness and sensuality are inappropriate at your age. Maintain your own sense of yourself as an erotic, sensual being. Flirt with your partner. Touch him playfully. Communicate through your energy and presence that you're alive and engaged with the erotic dimension of relationship, not just the companionate. That aliveness is magnetic and keeps relationships vital in ways that purely functional companionship never can.
The integration, psychological strength creates attraction. What unites all 5 positions is psychological strength, the capacity to be fully yourself, to hold your own center, to receive without anxiety, to challenge toward growth, to take emotional responsibility, to maintain your aliveness and erotic energy. These aren't about performing for men or strategically manipulating attraction. They're about psychological development and maturity that makes you more attractive as a natural byproduct of becoming more fully yourself. Jung's entire body of work pointed toward individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, integrated, fully yourself. The 5 positions we've discussed are expressions of that psychological wholeness applied to relationship. When you embody them, you're not trying to be attractive, you're being psychologically mature and integrated, and that maturity is inherently attractive to men who've done their own psychological work. Robert explained it this way. Eleanor embodies all of these qualities. She holds her center, receives graciously, challenges me to grow, takes responsibility for her emotions, maintains her aliveness and erotic energy. None of it feels like performance or strategy. It feels like who she is, a psychologically mature, integrated woman who's fully present in relationship while remaining fundamentally herself. That wholeness is the most attractive quality I've ever experienced in a partner. The 5 positions men beg for, but women rarely try: holding your own center, receiving without keeping score, challenging toward growth, taking emotional responsibility, and maintaining erotic energy and playfulness, aren't strategies to manipulate attraction. They're expressions of psychological maturity and integration that naturally create deeper connection, respect, and sustained attraction in relationship. At this stage of life, you have the opportunity to embody these positions more fully than you could have in your younger years. You have the psychological development, the self-knowledge, the life experience to hold your center, to receive graciously, to challenge intelligently, to manage your emotions maturely, to maintain your aliveness. These aren't about sacrificing yourself or becoming less. They're about becoming more fully yourself in ways that create the conditions for profound partnership. If this conversation gave you new insight into relationship dynamics at a psychological level, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community of women who are committed to understanding what actually creates fulfilling partnership. We're having depth conversations here about the psychology of relationship, not just surface tactics. Until next time, do your own psychological work, embody these positions authentically, and remember that the most attractive thing you can be is psychologically whole and fully yourself.